Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome from Nemesis, Lord of Darkness. No, yes. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Oops, I mean Countless Corpses podcast, home of the Stab Signal and a part of the Omen podcast network. Speaking of Omen, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel down below and watch last month's episode on Richard Donner's classic, The Omen, on our channel. Then, when your craving for chilling carnage hasn't been quenched, make sure you check out some of the fine horror-related titles from Omen to include White Druid Michael Nero, the Viking-themed horror title Satyr, or my personal favorite, Gallows Men. Yeah, go check that out.
Yeah.
So, on that note, come take the drop. Oops, sorry, hanging out there. With your with me, your co-host Nem. So, I am so happy to be here with all of you again, along with my good friend Macabre Mike Nunneley over there, to share with you our evil trivia pie pieces and reviews of the horrifying, grotesque, devilish, ghoulish, chilling, evil, and tantalizingly terrifying. If you're new to the show, this is a meeting of the minds, twisted as they are, of two longtime horror fans and current horror writers, where we get together and talk about our shared love of horror movies. Join us for a trip down Boogeyman Boulevard. So, absolutely, I love the evil laugh there. So, as you may have guessed, we're here this month to talk about 2019's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. This movie, adapted from the excellent book by Alvin Schwartz, a little bit more on that later, was optioned by CBS Films and championed by none other than Guillermo del Toro himself. And Mike is a big fan, and we're going to hear about that as well. So, but before we get to that, I want to welcome my good friend and fellow evil Lord of Darkness, Macabre Mike Nunneley again, and throw it over him to say a few words before we dig into the meat and potatoes of this surprisingly scary film. Over to you, Mike.
Oh, yes, the Dark Lords have entered. I do have a few things to say, actually. When Nim approached me about doing Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, I'll admit I had a couple of problems with it right off the bat. There are not many PG-13 horror movies that have done it for me. Another adjacent problem to that is that it's based on scary stories for children. I mean, what the hell? But then he said three words that are sure to get me to watch any film. Guillermo del fucking Toro. But I still went in rather skeptical about liking the film, even knowing the magic that del Toro can bring to a film. But talk about don't judge a book by its cover. Apparently you can't judge movies by their cover either. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark has some genuinely creepy and scary moments in it that will find their ways into my nightmares at some point. Case in point, 10,000 spiders will crawl out of my face at some point in the future. But I think you had a similar reticence about watching the film, didn't you, Nim?
Yeah, absolutely. I do have to say, my daughters asked me to get this film to watch for Halloween a few years ago, and I was really, really reluctant. I mean, the only reason I watched the movie is because you can't say no to two daughters who want to sit down and watch a horror movie with Papa. I mean, that's just good dad time right there. You know, it's family entertainment. Yeah. So that said, I'll be honest and say I thought I was in for some teeny bopper Goosebumps stuff. And no offense to R.L. Stine, I do enjoy watching Goosebumps or even reading it sometimes when I want some light material to brighten my day. But yeah, Goosebumps is not the thing that nightmares are made of. You know, I'm sorry, Mr. Stine, but they just aren't.
You know, I don't think that I have seen Goosebumps, but if the filmmakers did not increase the horror of their stories, you know, leaning into an older audience than the books intended, then I can totally see why you would feel that way. I'm sure I would be right there with you, but why don't we get into the origins and adaptations section of this discussion?
Absolutely. And I do have to say, I think it's worth noting that the original books, and there are 3 of them, by the way, were a collection of short horror stories for children written by Alvin Schwartz in the 80s and illustrated by Stephen Gammell. And pay attention to that name because it's going to be hugely important later on. To be honest, I had not read the books And when I heard about the movie and that source material, I would read them later on. So I read them as an adult. But instead of being a preteen terror romp like I thought it was going to be, Schwartz, who is a folklorist by trade, leaned heavily on urban legend and myth to craft his scary stories to tell in the dark. Schwartz's books include such topics as voodoo, death omens, the Wendigo, backseat killers, boogeymen, witches, poltergeists, being chased by death, and so much more. You know, all the little things that make for just a wonderful existence or non-existence, undeath, as it were. So,
yeah, baby.
they are awesome books and awesome tales, and I wish that I had found these books when I was a child. I'd probably be more messed up than I am now, and exactly the kind of stuff I loved to read when I was a kid. By the way, can you imagine me more messed up today than I am now?
No.
Yeah, I can't either. Can you imagine? So, I thought the research and attention to folklore was fantastic. And if you could get more kids into modeling tales from around the world, that's a bonus for me. I mean, even if the books aren't particularly frightening for a grizzled old horror vet like me, they still are there to be the gateway drug for kids into this crazy world we like to call scary stories. And so I think that you, Mike Nunneley, are also a huge fan of mythology and folklore. So what did you think of the urban legend, mythology, and horror as a general rule, and then how they adapted that in these books and or the movie?
I have to be honest and say that I only recognize 2 of the urban legend stories from the first book, and that's because I had heard them myself when I was a child or saw them in a film or in a couple films, come to think of it. The first story is The Hook. There are variations on this tale, and I have heard a few of them, but all of them are along the same lines. You have a couple on Lover's Lane somewhere, and the girl starts hearing noises, and then the boy does too. They hear about lunatics having escaped from an asylum or a prison or something on the radio. And sometimes, like in the case of the book, it is just one guy that the radio reporter is talking about with a hook for a hand. I have also heard it so that they hear voices of the Hook scratching on the door, and the girl gets freaked out and they leave only to hear about the killer on the radio when they get home. In that version, it is implied that the killer tried to get to them, but they drove off, leaving his bloody hook hand stuck to the door. Either way, once the 2 are away and safe, they later discover the hook on the door. But there are also variations of this that don't involve a hook at all. Roman Craig in The Great Outdoors told a story about a family who went into the woods and was attacked by a band of escaped army psychiatric patients who had been subjected to a violent, hellish, torturous behavior modification experiments. It seems they escaped from the mental boxes the army kept them in, found his family in the woods, fell upon them, and slaughtered them and ate them. It's not exactly the same, but there are some key points that are. You have lunatics of some sort escaping or coming upon people in the woods or up on a mountain overlooking the city. Either way, they are far away from the protection of the city and on their own. That premise is in all the versions.
Absolutely cool. So, you know, having you talk about that, I'm not sure if you've seen this, but there is a zany 1970 era comedy starring Bill Murray that features him telling a campfire story about the Hook. So, evil peace to you or to any of you viewers out there, if you could get it, if you know that movie.
I'm suddenly getting a craving for meatballs from a restaurant in 2 Pines. So, evil trivia pie piece for me then?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, meatballs. Take that evil trivia pie piece and consume, my friend. Consume.
Nice. Nom, nom, nom and shit. The other story I recognized from the book was The Babysitter, and I know that story from horror movies. The opening of one film in particular, and that is 1979's When a Stranger Calls.
I have to say that the idea behind that film, and I do remember the ads for that film that scared the hell out of me, just that concept scares the hell out of me, especially when I was a kid and we would be home with the babysitter. I mean, I'm sorry to interject there, but I had to get my monthly therapy session out of the way. So congratulations, you got to hear it. You and all the viewers out there.
No. I totally get it, man. You feel safe in your own house, you know, especially as a kid. It's a comfort zone. To have a threat within your home is terrifying and violating. But let's get into the story. The babysitter in When a Stranger Calls, Jill Johnson, keeps getting increasingly maniacal phone calls from a stranger who keeps asking if she has checked on the children. Jill freaks out and calls the police, but the calls continue. The police finally trace the call and inform Jill that the calls are coming from upstairs in the house. Jill sees the intruder's shadow. Unbeknownst to her, the stranger was an English merchant seaman named Kurt Duncan, and he had killed the children shortly after Jill arrived to babysit. He leaves Jill unharmed, and after his trial is sent to a psychiatric facility. The story in the book is similar, but the killer keeps calling to tell the couple of people who answer the phone that he is coming and he will be there soon. Each time it's a shorter time until he arrives. In the book, they call the operator, not the police, but the operator too says that the call is coming from upstairs. Just then, a door upstairs opened. A man they had never seen before started down the stairs towards them. As they ran from the house, he was smiling in a very strange way. A few minutes later, the police found him there and arrested him. A variation on this theme can be found in 1996's Scream with the Barrymore opening. She gets increasingly harassing and more threatening phone calls, only to find out that the person on the phone is in or at her house. This idea would turn into the characteristic trait of Ghostface, but neither of those stories made it into the film.
So who am I channeling here? Who's there? Who's there?
Is that you, Casey Becker?
Ding, 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 ding. Yeah, I do have to say that's really too bad that those stories didn't make it in, since they are classic Americana urban legends. They're the things that all kids hear at campfire stories and things like that. And I love that you tied the man in the house legend to Scream. I mean, I never thought about it before, but you are absolutely right. And I love that movie opening. For only a few minutes of screen time, Drew Barrymore's stalk and kill is chef's kiss fantastic.
Yeah, baby, that was a great kill, and we're going to cover Scream on this show. So I don't want to dive too deep into that. But I will say that there is a certain pseudo-detached disbelief in the situation that people have in those moments. I mean, sure, they know they're in danger and they're afraid, but for some strange reason, it just doesn't actually get truly real for them until the knife actually pierces their flesh. You can see it in their eyes in that moment when they feel the cold steel blade inside of them. It changes the whole game. This is real. I'm going to die. Anyway, I described that because I feel like they showed that well in that scene. There was an obvious change in Casey Becker when Ghostface caught up to her and first stuck that knife into her chest. Things clearly went up a level at that point. As far as her getting disemboweled, that was awesome. And I will go one step further and say that there's not nearly enough disembowelments in horror movies.
And they don't call him Macabre Mike Nunneley for nothing, folks. Give yourself a stab signal, you sick bastard. Oh, man. Oh, more disembowelments from Mike Nunneley. That's a quote. We're going to put that on a t-shirt, folks. Look for the merch soon. So, yeah, let's get into the nuts and bolts of this movie here. I know that you are a huge fan of Guillermo del Toro, who was in turn a huge fan of these books and championed this project. So, with that in mind, why don't you kick off our discussion of how these wonderful books were turned into the movie we're discussing today? Take it away, Mike.
I'd be happy to. Back in 2014, CBS Films picked up the rights to Schwartz children's book series from 2012 Entertainment so they could make it into a feature film. John August had been brought on to write the screenplay based on the books that same time. 2 years later, in 2016, Guillermo del Toro, one of my all-time favorite directors, by the way, came on as a producer to develop the film along with Sean Daniel, Jason Brown, and Elizabeth Grave. There were early talks about del Toro potentially directing the film as well, but nothing really settled in that department at that time. In addition to that, Robert Grande and Joshua Long came on as executive producers. That same year, CBS Films hired Dan and Kevin Hageman to polish John August's script. I don't know when exactly August finished the script initially or what the studio felt like they needed polishing. But there it is. The Hackamans received final screenplay credit, with Del Toro, Patrick Melton, and Marcus Dunstan receiving story by credit. Despite Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark being an anthology book, it was decided that the film would be something more akin to the Goosebumps movie, and that the movie and the monsters would be a blend of stories and amalgamated characters, along with an all-new story and characters. Late in 2017, Andre Uberdahl came on to direct the film, and by August 27th, 2018, principal photography started. But clear into September, the movie was still being cast. At San Diego Comic-Con in 2019, Del Toro explained why they did not do the anthology approach taken by the source material. He said, "When we started this about 5 years ago, I had to think about it. Anthology films are always as bad as the worst story in them. They're never as good as the best story." I remembered in Pan's Labyrinth, I created a book called The Book of Crossroads. I thought it could be great if we had a book that reads you and writes what you're most afraid of. Then the theme became stories we tell each other. They set the film in 1968, a very pivotal year for the U.S. Vietnam War escalated, the draft was going on, Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy were assassinated, and Richard fucking Nixon was elected, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, really. In Del Toro's words, it's a coming-of-age story set in a crucial point in American history. This is the end of childhood for the kids and an awakening time for the United States. The movie is not by any means a political statement, but the movie has that background that makes it really interesting and really compelling. I think people are expecting the scares and the creatures and fun, but I think they'll find the characters are memorable. It is actually that socio-political context that attracted Del Toro to the project originally.
When I want scary stories to tell in the dark, I watch Countless Corpses podcast. Oh!
Hell yeah, baby. Tricky Dick comes in.
Absolutely. Oh man, with all due credit to the great Billy West, who inspired my Richard Nixon from Futurama there. So anyway, I do find that is really fascinating about using the 1960s to tell a coming of age story, and also to avoid the anthology look for the film, instead put the legends into one narrative. I think it's particularly interesting that the Goosebumps movie, we're going back to Goosebumps again, was used as a reference. I think there are key differences between the films, though. I will say that. As a side note, the Goosebumps movie, which I do like to watch for light fun, it's one of those movies that is fun to watch, but I don't think I consider it a horror movie. So that's one of the main differences there. So anyway, I digress. I know we are going to get into this as a story section, but did this whole approach work for you? What they did with turning it in the 1960s, avoiding the anthology? Do you think they were successful in what they were trying to do?
I definitely think it worked for them. Had they done this as an anthology, it would not have flowed as well or been scary enough, unless they got the Crypt Keeper to host, of course. But since they couldn't get him, this was the best way to go. I think it was significantly more enjoyable as a blend of stories than it would have been on its own. This way, you actually get to know the characters better, and ultimately, that makes it more scary because we care about them. I think that setting it in 1968 was a good choice, too. Kids today would not have done the same things as kids back then. Plus, it would have gone a bit differently in the age of technology, social media, and streaming. You know, those kids would have streamed that shit right to YouTube or Twitch or something. It's just, it would have been an entirely different movie. But what do you say we get into the visual effects for the film, Oh Dark One Nemesis?
The Dark One, I love that. Yeah, before we do that real quick, I'm still working on this voice, but hello, kiddies, and welcome to another Countless Corpses podcast, where they're talking about scary stories to tell in the dark. All right.
That actually wasn't too bad. You're definitely getting better at that.
Thank you. I'm trying. I'm working on it. So, yeah, visual effects. Heck yeah. So, I do have to say, I love visual effects, especially old-time practical effects, and apparently, so does Guillermo del Toro. Del Toro, in his role as producer, encouraged director Andre Uberdahl and his team to lean heavily on his experience on movies like Hellboy and Pan's Labyrinth. Most notably, Del Toro championed the use of practical effects, supplemented with clever use of digital effects. I've talked about this elsewhere, most notably on Cinema Crusaders, which is on every Friday. Little shout out there.
Yeah, check it out, folks.
Yeah, thank you. But I will say again that I am a huge fan of practical effects, as I said before, in all movies, but particularly in horror movies. Why do I say that? I don't think you can give short shrift to an authentic actor's reaction to spurting blood, a grotesque puppet or suit, and the visceral feel to true life oozing slime. I mean, it's just amazing. It's wonderful. But before we get into the specifics for this film, what do you think, Mike, in general? Are you a fan of practical effects?
I am a big fan of practical effects, but I must add that I think perfection is achieved when both practical and digital effects are used. But there's a caveat here. The digital effects are meant to enhance the real thing rather than be the thing itself. You are right when you say it is better for the actors. The less they have to imagine, the better the performance is going to be on their part. This, of course, extends to sets as well. As to your point, I would like to direct our listeners to the chest burster scene from 1979's classic Alien. Ridley Scott wouldn't tell anyone but John Hurt and the effects people what was going on in that scene. He actually kept the actors out in their trailers and wouldn't even let them come on set until it was time to film. Plus, there was considerably more blood spurted out than Veronica Cartwright was told about. So the reaction Scott was getting from the actors was a mixture of genuine reactions as well as improv acting. I explain all of that because that is an amazing scene, and everyone who watches in it is absolutely engrossed in that moment. Ridley Scott understood that putting the actors in that moment as best as possible would get the greatest performance out of them. So yes, a credit to the director there, but a big part of the actors and actresses' performance in that scene was the practical effects and the set design.
You know, that's absolutely incredible. And it's such an iconic scene that nobody who has seen the movie ever forgets. Although I do have to say, that story that you just told us, which was incredible, by the way, reminds me of our discussion on our last episode about directors being evil bastards sometimes to get a performance out of their actors. I mean, at least there was no child abuse here, but damn, I mean, God damn.
It is true. And all I can say is that actors must either like it or understand the reason for it, because they keep coming back to make films. But sometimes even directors need a bit of manipulation to get the job done. Eli Roth played the Bear Jew in Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds, and he had to get all pumped up with weights and psyching himself up and get ready for the role. But every day for 4 or 5 days, Tarantino would have Roth get all psyched up and pumped up, lifting weights all fucking morning, up and only to tell him at the end of the day that they were going to film the scene the next day. And Roth was getting straight up pissed. By the time Tarantino finally did the scene, Eli Roth was like a rabid animal, and it truly added to the performance. But despite being a director himself, Roth fell for the manipulation. I'm not sure what to say about that, but the word director is Spanish for diabolical. But let's talk about Guillermo del Toro.
Very nice, my friend. I must say, for your comment, ese director es diabólico. Es perfecto. So, let's kick this off with a somewhat controversial statement from me. I say that this movie should be a guide for every Hollywood movie seeking to adapt existing works, especially graphic medium like comics. Why do I say that? Well, when Guillermo del Toro secured this project, he immediately knew that he wanted to leverage his past horror experience, and he approached veteran special effects artist and owner of Spectral Motion, Mike Elizalde. Elizalde, who has worked on Hellboy, Stranger Things, and X-Men First Class, among many others, was immediately sold on the project while del Toro pitched it to him, assuring him that the caliber of the filmmaking team would be top-notch and that they would be staying true to the tone and look, get that, look of the books. When he heard that, Mike Elizalde and his wife Mary immediately jumped on board. Mike Elizalde, talking about the book, said, "This is a series of books that I remember as terrifying. Just the imagery alone. If you didn't read the stories and you only saw the images of Stephen Gammell, they were burned into your subconscious forever because they're frightening." Absolutely. He went on to say they have a primal kind of quality that reaches into your soul and says, there's something very wrong going on here, and you can't unsee it. So I'm just going to get on my soapbox for a minute, but the people that came ahead of you are crazy good artists, and they're giving you the roadmap, especially for comics and stuff like this. So anyway, down off my soapbox. So with Elizalde on board, Guillermo and Andre approached the team with 4 main monsters they wanted visualized for the movie. Elizalde broke his talented team into 2 groups, and they tackled the previs and then execution of those looks for 4 monsters: Harold the Scarecrow, the Pale Lady, the Toeless Corpse, and the Jangly Man. And we're going to get into all of those, and we each have our favorites, and we're going to get into that as well. So, but Elizalde would go on to explain that all of them were going to be actors in a rig, either prosthetics or a creature suit. That was an incredible challenge for us. But the easy part of it was that most of the design work was already done, said Elizalde, referring to Stephen Gammell's original illustrations. So, noting that much of the previs work was already done by Gammell decades earlier, what did you think of the monsters in the movie, Mike, and which of the monsters in the movie was your favorite?
I will get into that in just a second, but I will note, as you kind of hinted at earlier, that from what I understand from people who read the original books back when they were kids or whatever, that it was in fact Gammell's artwork that was really the scary part. I mean, the stories were scary. I mean, to a child, I suppose, but it was the artwork that really kind of terrified people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But there were a couple that I found particularly creepy, and I will actually get into that in more detail later when we talk about the story of the film. But the 2 that got me were the Toeless Corpse and the Jangly Man. They made the Toeless Corpse under the bed look very scary. In part, I think it was because of how it was shot, and partly because of the story itself. The Toeless Corpse coming in from outside and up the stairs and up to Augie's room. Having him suddenly appear under the bed got me. I'll admit that. But coupled with that frightening face, it made me jump a little. I'm not gonna lie. The other one that really got me was the Jangly Man, and that was definitely because of the practical and digital effects blending there. Having an actual 3D monster there totally makes a difference in the fear factor. CGI is just not on a level where it's not obvious when it's used, and I think it would have been less scary if Jangly Man was CGI. How's that?
That's fantastic, man, and exactly the kind of detail that I was looking for and our viewers are looking for. And I can't wait to hear more about those monsters in more detail later. We're going to cover the design process on each of the monsters because, quite frankly, they deserve it. So don't worry about that. We're going to get into that. And right now, I'm going to kick it off with my personal favorite, which is Harold the Scarecrow. Now, we're going to talk about his role in the film later on, but Harold is featured in the books as well. Harold's story in the books, though, is different from what is told in the movie, but the core elements of the story are the same. In the book, Harold is abused constantly by his creators and was originally fashioned to mock a man that the creators of Harold hated. Eventually, Harold comes to life, rises up to take revenge, and the end of the story finds him stretching out the corpse of one of his creators, securing him in place as a scarecrow in revenge. I mean, he goes full Michael Myers on one of his creators. So that is pretty damn hardcore, in my opinion. So with that in mind, can we please get a stab signal for Harold, Mike?
Hell yeah, we can.
Harold the Scarecrow, we salute you.
Oh, yeah.
So, all right. So, no more gratuitously fun stabbings for the moment. We have work to do. So, Mike's all disturbed. Let's get down to business and break down the design process for the monsters. Man, only Mike Nunneley could be upset that we're not going to have gratuitously fun stabbings. So, this is the material, folks. We're here for it. All right. Norman Cabrera led the team for Harold the Scarecrow, and Elizalde Cabrera and the rest of the creative team decided that Harold would be a construct of different elements, i.e., rotting pumpkins for a belly, wooden framework for a skeleton, etc., etc. So during the design process, Cabrera suggested that Harold's head could be an old rubber mask from a novelty store that they left to rot in the sun. Elizalde loved that idea. It gave Harold human qualities and characteristics while still being completely terrifying, and I think both of us agree. They also knew that they didn't want Harold's anatomy to be too human, and they wanted it to feel like pieces of rope, wood, and wire that were all strung together. So with that in mind, Elizalde brought on fabricator Bruce Mitchell to work out how the joints would move. Mitchell made artificial limbs out of foam, and it looked beautiful. It looked like old rotting wood. Spectral Motion's hard work matched perfectly with actor Mark Steger's movements. According to Elizalde, we structured it onto the performer's body in such a way that when Mark moved, the pieces moved differently than he did. It had a very eerie, creepy, and disjointed kind of feel that was very effective. And I agree. I love this character and how they worked it into the story. I thought it was very effective on screen and appropriately frightening to me. But what did you think, Mike? What did you think of Harold?
Oh, Harold definitely creeped me right the fuck out. I have to say that it was Norman Cabrera's idea to use an old Halloween mask for the face that really made him scary. A lot of the scarecrows that I have personally seen had a gunny sack with a face painted on it and stuffed with straw as a head, and that just would not have been as scary. But that mask gave Harold a kind of Michael Myers vibe to it to me, and that really just amped up the scary factor.
Hell yeah! I was hoping that you would get that special Mike Myers feeling in your heart, and I'm so glad you did, man. Yeah, I always love it when you get to get a little Mike Myers feeling in your heart because I know it's going to be a glorifyingly evil day for you. So, but with that in mind, why don't you tell us about your favorite monster, Mike?
I'd love to. My favorite character was the Jangly Man, and he was actually a character that didn't come from Stephen Gammel's artwork. Guillermo del Toro and Andre Uberdahl put together a team of artists who initially illustrated the concept art for the Spectral team to reference under the guidance of supervisor Mike Hill at Spectral Motion. The practical suit made for Jangly Man was, according to Mike Elizalde, an amalgam of a lot of different cues that were referenced from the artwork. The team working on the character had a lot more fun with the Jangly Man because there was more freedom to do and try different things. And I can imagine that would make it a lot more fun without the constriction of guidelines. Aside from his fantastic in-house dream team, Spectral Motion, Mike also credits the success of the project to his long-standing relationship with Guillermo del Toro. What I always loved about Guillermo is that he enjoys giving the artist license and a sense of ownership in what they're creating. I love the level of respect that he has for the people who are in the trenches building this stuff and crafting it with their hands. He is very passionate, but he also approaches the creative process from a very methodical, very technical, and artistically oriented perspective, as I think all directors should. But they still had to get an actor that could play the Jangly Man, and that had to be difficult. But they found a contortionist by the name of Troy James who fit the bill. He is the only guy who can do the things that he can do with his body, Elizalde explained. It is just crazy things. Incredibly limber is an understatement. I mean, the guy can turn himself into a puddle right before your eyes. So that was the creation process of the Jangly Man. I will get more into the character and his roots in the books a bit later when we get into the movie itself. But for now, my man Nim here has got a few things to say about the Pale Lady.
Absolutely, but I can't wait to hear more about the Jangly Man later. He really was incredibly creepy, and I have to say the contortionists, as a general rule, creep me right the fuck out. I mean, even when they aren't dressed up as monsters. I will also say for that actor in particular, if you want to see him not in costume, he was on America's Got Talent. You can check it out on YouTube. I don't know what season it was, but he is an incredibly talented guy. It's just contortionists are creepy. That's all I'm going to say. So, but back to the process and everything. So on Harold, like I said, Norman Cabrera led the team for Harold the Scarecrow and the Toeless Corpse. And while Mike Hill took the helm for both the Jangly Man and the Pale Lady. When they were designing this suit, they found that the Pale Lady character presented a few unique challenges of its own, making the whole build a fun team experience as they worked to overcome those challenges and come up with something that worked on screen and was usable by the performer in the suit. And I absolutely love that. I mean, listen to that, what they're saying, that instead of looking at it as something they had to do, it's a challenge. It's a fun thing they love to do because they love their craft.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can tell when somebody truly loves what they're doing. You can tell, you can see it in their work, and I think like you were implying there, I think you can see that in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark as well.
Absolutely, and I think that translates. I mean, I think the actors pick up on it as well, so it just makes for an overall better experience. So, speaking of the performer in this suit, the suit would also be worn by the same performer who was in Harold the Scarecrow, veteran monster suit actor Mark Steger, who is known for bringing many characters to life with spectral motion in the past, to include the Demogorgon from the first season of Stranger Things.
Hell yeah.
Just a great experience there, a great portrayal on screen. Steger, like I said, also portrayed Harold in the film, showing how versatile he is and how much damn hard work these guys do on films. And most of the time, you never know their name or see their face. They're just consummate professionals out there. But I digress. In an interview, Elizalde explained one of the performance problems created by the character design, though. There was this issue of where the eyes were. In the Pale Lady design, they're just too far apart for a human, he would explain. So we had to create little peepholes for Mark to be able to see where he was going. There was also a lot of discussion about how to execute the Pale Lady's outfit, which resulted in a rather unsettling solution. Elizalde would say, we decided that we don't know what it is, what she's wearing. We don't know if it's skin or if it's a nightgown fabric that's fused on, which makes it even creepier. Elizalde went on to say, in the paint job, there are these stains that have dried, and it's terrifying. You don't want to get near this thing. I agree.
Yeah, but I just have to comment on the effects job there. I mean, as you can see, looking at the Pale Lady, her eyes are way too far apart to see, like you were saying. But you don't see even the hint of like the little eye holes they had to put in there or nothing. I mean, it just brilliant effects there. I thought that was cool.
It really is, and it shows how good they are at their job. Plus, there's a possibility, and I don't know the answer to this, that they may have used some CGI to cover up anything that showed up. But either way, like you said, on screen, you don't see it. And that makes it that much creepier because it really brings you into the illusion of the monster and makes you believe that this freaky thing is real. And I have to say that I agree with Elizalde's sentiment on the painting and everything. But I will say that I found this character more grotesque than terrifying. And grotesque is not bad in horror. Let me just say that straight up as well. But either way, I will say that it is very effective. And I can't say enough good things about this whole team and the job they did. I mean, just like I said, consummate professionals. Well, so with that in mind, let's get into our final monster build, which Mike is going to talk about. So over to you, Mike.
That sounds like a good idea. But first, I have to talk about the Pale Lady. She was more disturbing to look at than she was actually scary. And I will add this, and I think I've said this before on the show, but part of a horror movie's point, part of their job is to make you uncomfortable. Doesn't necessarily have to make you afraid, but uncomfortable is good. I'd like to point out like the hotel scene in The Devil's Rejects. You know what I'm saying? Not necessarily scary, but very uncomfortable. And I think the Pale Lady kind of takes you there. But the next monster I want to talk about is the Toeless Corpse. The constant challenge for the Spectral Motion team usually involved having to turn Stephen Gamel's loose two-dimensional illustrations into functional three-dimensional characters. The Toeless Corpse offered another chance for Spectral Motion to work their magic. Mike Elizalde was super excited to work with suit performer Javier Botet and get him into the Toeless Corpse outfit. Anytime you get to work with Javier, it's such a treat. He's an incredible human being who can do amazing things with his body and has exceeded the dimensions of a human so much that it's eerie. It was an exciting experience because we had not only a terrifying character, but the perfect actor. And then Norman Cabrera to put his signature on it. To become the Toeless Corpse, Javier Botet's body was painted, and then the costume was put on over the top of that. The section of the prosthetic appliances were then applied to Javier Botet's face, and gloves were glued onto his wrists. Mike Elizalde insisted on using foam latex instead of silicone for the prosthetic appliances, which is the industry standard, actually. Granted, silicone does have advantages that foam latex doesn't, but with a heavily stylized character like the Toeless Corpse, the latex foam rubber worked out nicely. It's very pliable and lightweight material, Mike Elizalde explained. It has great memory elasticity, and I think it breathes a little bit better than silicone does. If formulated correctly, it's incredibly supple, flexible, and lifelike. Even subtle facial expressions can be read on the surface. It's a material where you can significantly control its density. So if you need it to be tougher, you can make it more robust. It's highly controllable. Besides, many effects artists do actually agree with Mike Elizalde on that, and more people have been going back to latex foam because of its breathability and elasticity.
That's awesome, man. I mean, that's an awesome breakdown of how they do this stuff. And I think it's really cool. I will also say that if you want to get into more depth and detail, go find an old show from Sci-Fi called Face Off. It was a reality show, contest show. But tons of practical effects people were on there, including Mike Elizalde. He was a judge on the show for a while. So go check it out. It's definitely worth seeing. And I have to say that I love that Elizalde and people like him are still out there doing the practical effects that, when combined with digital, are making horror movies that much more horrific. Is that right? Or did I just murder the English language?
Seriously though, I agree with that. CGI gets better all the time, but I really hope the practical effects are not abandoned. It is indeed nice to hear that people are still using them.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, before we jump into the story, one of the sections we love to cover when there is something to cover, and that's not always the case, is the soundtrack of our film. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the soundtrack on this film right now. So the original orchestral pieces for this film were composed by two people, Marco Beltrame and Anna Drubich. Beltrame is also known for his work on Scream 2 and 3. Mike likes those. Hellboy, and Halloween H2O. So, among others. Drubich, who was born in Moscow and immigrated to the U.S., has done work for many films to include Anna Karenina and Fear Street. And the original orchestral pieces in this movie do a good job of setting the tone and transitioning us where appropriate. However, in my opinion, the stars of the soundtrack for this particular film are the supplemental vocal and orchestral pieces used to supplement the film and set the mood, placing the movie in the 1960s. Underground horror composer Nicholas Carras's pieces are featured in a number of places, lifted from some of the horror movies he worked on in the past. Karras worked on such films as Frankenstein's Daughter, Dr. Sex, Ostro Zombies, and more, and they are pure 60s schlock that is still fun to watch. What do you say, Mike? You want to watch Dr. Sex and cover it on the show sometime?
I'm going to pass on Dr. Sex. You want me to talk about a doctor? It's got to be Dr. Satan.
Okay. Fair. I will also say that there are several 60 songs which are featured in the film to include Quick Joey Small and Season of the Witch by Donovan. So, I know that you are a hardcore metalhead, Mike, but what did you think of Season of the Witch being in there? Because personally, I love that song.
I really love the song as well. I mean, it sounds very awesome, and I have to reiterate, it sounds very awesome. I have to say that Season of the Witch actually sounds much cooler than the lyrics provide for. You can tell that the lyricist wanted to say Season of the Witch and just threw in whatever rhymed, whether it made sense or not. You got to pick up every stitch. What the fuck does that mean? But that rant aside, the song is pretty cool and somewhat apropos as well.
We're going to go talk to Mitch and have a little hitch and do some Season of the Witch. So, fair. This is true. All right. So now that we've gotten the soundtrack out of the way, and go check it out. Go listen to it because there's some really cool stuff in there. Let's bite into this juicy tomato. So why don't you tell us more about the story presented in the film, Mike? So take it away.
I'd be happy to. So the Stella character is easy to relate to, as she too is a writer, but she seems to really be struggling with it. I mean, her friends seem to like her writing, but Stella is reluctant to share it or put it out there, and I kind of get that, actually. I mean, Stella's telling of Cerebello's story at the end to set her free was not great. To be fair, she was pressed for time, but that was more a reciting of facts rather than a story, in my opinion. So it would seem that the book of stories written in blood plays a little loosey-goosey with the word story.
Man, I mean, just damn. She's writing for her life, and Macabre Mike Nunneley out here is channeling one of the scariest things, a literary critic. I mean, that is one of the scariest damn things in the world, and I know you know what I'm talking about. So, stab signal to you, my friend, on keeping it real. So.
Hey, you know, I do what I can to bring the terror to the show.
Succeeded. Succeeded.
Nice. But seriously, in the movie world, not all ghosts are bad. Like, you know, Egon Spangler coming back at the end of Ghostbusters Afterlife, or Sam Wheat from Ghost. So it was not necessarily stupid to talk to a ghost just because it was a ghost. My thought is that Stella maybe wanted to pick up some writing tips from a ghost known to tell stories. It was also definitely stupid to take the book. She clearly did not learn her lesson, as she eagerly awaited hearing Cerebello's voice on that wax recording. But one thing at a time. Now, I have a somewhat personal question for you, Nem, but I'm going to go first to make it fair.
Okay.
When I was 17, Stella's age, I would have asked Cerebellos to tell me a story ignorantly as well. But I was what used to be called a seeker. I did blood rituals, played with Ouija boards, read books on magic. I attended a seance once and everything. I desperately wanted to see and believe that the spiritual, paranormal, and supernatural existed, and I was on a mission to find it. But what did you think of Stella asking Sarah Bellows to tell her a story when the kids were at the Bellows mansion? And would you have done the same thing at 17, Nim? Would you have spoken to a ghost, or were such things trivial after you ventured past the gate beyond which all hope should be abandoned?
Sinner. So, to be fair, I hadn't yet transcended to the shadow plane at this time, or at least not as the world knew. No, I was still growing in my power, and so I hid myself away until I ascended into my Nim throne. No, all right. Yeah, let's be serious though. I was exactly like you. I did a lot of stupid shit as a kid, seeking answers to questions that probably can't be answered, or that shouldn't be answered, or that you don't want answered, you know? So I visited haunted locations. I used Ouija boards. I read all sorts of material and books, to include ones that no one should read. That's all I'm going to say about that. Dabbed in so-called ritual and tarot magic, researched various esoterica, and even tried some potion work to see what would happen, as my cat comes up here because he's the cat of darkness. I even went to psychics and all that too. So yeah, I was out there living my worst life, secure that I was safe for insert some insanely stupid reason because I was 17 and invincible, and I got my fluffy little Nim tail singed here and there. So That is a whole other podcast, though, and it would be interesting to recount some of our tales sometimes. But like I said, whole other podcast. So regardless, yeah, I was a stupidly curious teenager once upon a time. Big shocker there. So.
Right on. I actually think it's cool that both of us were doing that stuff because it was the dark packs of our youth that have brought us here today. So consider that, listener. When you watch Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and you see Stella grab a book and ask Scarabellos to tell her a story and you start wondering, what the hell is she thinking? Consider that she may be a dark one such as we. People do walk where no one dares to tread, my friends.
Beware the dark ones.
Anyway, Chuck seeing Gertrude Bellows and her Doberman in that time-traveled room was kind of creepy. But then Gertrude slowly turned around and said, "This is an evil place. Get out while you still can." That fully creeped me out. Old people have done that to me since I saw Poltergeist 2 and was introduced to Reverend Henry fucking Kane. If you know, you know.
God is in his holy temple.
Oh, man. Exactly. That was one creepy ass old man. But here is the connection that Gertrude Bellows has to the Pale Lady. In the books, the Pale Lady also warns an artist named Lucy Morgan that the place she was in was dangerous and she should get out while she still could. When Lucy does not leave the house, the Pale Lady returns at Lucy Morgan's doorstep and scares the crap out of Morgan, so she moves away. In that same way, the Pale Lady, or rather Gertrude Bellows initially, first warned Chuck and then ended up killing Chuck by absorbing him via a very strong hug. Producer Guillermo del Toro has stated that each monster that appears in the film is meant to represent the fears of the main characters. In Chuck's case, it's physical touch. The Pale Lady's deadly hug is meant to parallel a scene earlier, which Chuck admonishes his mother for hugging him too tightly. So they took the concern that the Pale Lady had in the book and made it a horror feature, which I thought was clever. We do have a bit of character amalgamation going on there with the Pale Lady and Gertrude Bellows, and she is not the only character, but I am getting a bit ahead of myself. Back to the scene. Chuck saw while he was hiding in the closet with Gertrude Bellows and her Doberman. To my eyes, the scene itself, the way it was shot, the set and how it was performed, reminded me of a David Lynch kind of thing, like a Twin Peaks vibe. At least that's what I was getting. Not necessarily scary, but the creepy factor was turned up with that scene. How about you, Nema? Did you pick up on the David Lynch vibe with that scene? And was the creepy factor turned up there for you too?
I will say that I did not pick up on that, but now that you say it, I totally see it. And I have to say, man, I love that. And I love that about you, man. I mean, I think I know a movie, and then you throw something out there that makes me reevaluate what I thought I knew about the film. And I agree with you. David Lynch's work on Twin Peaks is so creepy in its banality and casual horrific sometimes. And that is definitely at play here. I mean, good call, my macabre man. Good call.
Thank you. I like talking about horror movies with you too. But something occurred to me. Harold the Scarecrow doesn't look anything like the average scarecrow, especially in the face. The story has Tommy to turn into a scarecrow that looks exactly like Harold, and he takes his place on the pole. I want to infer from that with my writer's brain that the cornfield or something possesses the body of the scarecrow, and when it is done, the body of the one that died takes its place. I might be on a Pumpkinhead trip here, having just watched it recently, but you'll notice that Ed Harley took the place of the previous Pumpkinhead in the grave.
And another good call here, man. Although I have to say that my writer's brain turned Harold into a demon. Big surprise there. Nim is going to demons again. But hear me out. The Scarecrow itself is a demonic entity picking one horrible person a generation to trap in a living death, forever tortured, eaten by bugs and such, and cursed to live in an undeath, looking out on life, the bounty of the field, and the people who work the farm. I mean, damn. Now I want to write that story. Seriously. I mean, is that sufficiently messed up to keep up my spot on Countless Corpses?
Oh, definitely. I like that a lot. So bring on the demons. That shit will
Nice.
scare me almost every time.
Coming
The
soon,
ones,
merch from Countless Corpses podcast. Bring on the demons. Macabre Mike and Nemesis.
yeah, baby. The one story within the story that really scared me, at least at the end, was the toeless corpse. August Augie Hildebrandt's story was based on the story called The Toe, sans the intro and with a different ending. In the story, the boy finds a toe in the garden and he tries to pick it up, but it's stuck. So he gives it a good yank and it detaches. He then takes the toe into the house and shows his parents. His mom throws it into the stew she is making, and at dinner, the kid's father cuts it into 3 pieces, and all of 3 of them eat their piece. So a little cannibalism in there for you.
Nice.
Augie's story, as written by Sarah Bellows, had his parents gone, and his mom says that she did not make the stew that he found in the refrigerator. Also, the dude puts a whole big toe in his mouth and pulls it out to realize that he had done so. Augie's death, however, was not in the story. But I have to tell you that seeing the toeless corpse pull Augie into the darkness is where I first got scared watching this movie. I was like, all right, that was scary. I think adding that bit with him under the bed and being pulled into the void of darkness, among other changes, really made what were not, in my personal opinion, the greatest stories actually get better. Like, I read all the stories from the first book for this episode, and I didn't get scared a single time. But what they brought in the movie under the amazingly talented Guillermo del Toro and the writing talents of the Hageman brothers, these stories actually got scary.
I have to say, I agree with you. And did you get the poltergeist reference here where the kid is pulled under the bed by that thrice damned evil clown? God damn it. I can't believe my mind went there. And now I'm going to be up all night thinking about clowns and dolls and all that other shit that scares the hell out of me. So this was generally creepy, though. Good call.
I did catch the poltergeist reference in there. That scene from Poltergeist creeped me out as well. As far as clowns go, it is all Poltergeist's fault that I have the fear of clowns and even some trees that I have. So we are on the same page there. I'd like to take a minute and talk to you about the Jangly Man, though. He seems the creepiest to me, though, and I honestly can't figure out what really is so unnerving about him, but he definitely is.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. I think it's our natural revulsion for contortionists and such. I mean, at least that's what it is for me. The way they contort their bodies is completely unnatural, and it gives you the heebie-jeebies, whether you want it to or not. Every movie that I have seen that features a contortionist doing some creepy shit freaks me out. The Exorcist, check. In the Mouth of Madness, check. Exorcist 3, check. Right down the line, contortionists can fuck right off as far as I'm concerned.
I think you're probably right about that. Unnatural movements and positions are always creepy, and I think it's because we can't help but imagine doing those things ourselves, looking at it being done. But I like the assembling and reassembling of the body parts. He is from the story "What Do You Come For?" From the first book, about a lonely old lady that wished for some company, and boy did she fucking get it. First, a pair of feet fell down her chimney, and then a pair of legs. These, of course, were followed by a torso, arms, and a head, which assembled into the Jangly Man. The Jangly Man danced around the room until the old woman asked, "What did you come for?" And the Jangly Man looked at her with a super creepy look in his face and said he had come for her. They did not do that in the film. They actually blended What Do You Come For short story with the Mitai Dodi Walker short story of the same name. There is a haunted house in Mitai Dodi Walker. There is a haunted house that no one will stay in because supposedly a bloody head falls down the chimney each night. A rich man offered 200 bones to anyone who was willing to stay a night in the house. A boy agreed to do so as long as he could take his dog with him. Later that night, a voice is heard singing, "Mitai Dodi Walker," far off in the distance, but it keeps getting closer and closer. What's super weird is that every time the voice says this, the kid's dog says, Lynchy, Kinchy, Collie Molly, Dingo, Dingo. And quite frankly, the dog talking freaked the boy out more than the approaching voice. I think
Fair.
this is used. Yeah, I think this is used with the sheriff's dog Trigger making the exact same grunting noise over and over again in the film. But back to the story. Finally, as promised, the bloody head comes rolling down the chimney right over to the dog, who is literally scared to death. The head turns towards the boy and screamed, and that is the end of the story. But in the movie, I got the sense that the jangly man was some type of pumpkin head. Here I go again. Like figure that was magically or supernaturally brought to life for one purpose. In this case, to kill Ramon for being a coward, because that is Ramon's fear. Any thoughts on that, Ned?
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with you. I think that's part of it, and I think it's an interesting commentary by the writers and Del Toro. You don't often find a Halloween movie that will tackle the subject of Vietnam and the draft in this manner, and it was an interesting choice to say the least. Additionally, the commentary on the film suggests that there were implications for Ramon's family because he was choosing to dodge the draft, though that was left out of the final cut. Rather than going political with the whole thing, though, Del Toro and his crew really struck with their coming-of-age theme and made Ramon face up to his responsibilities eventually. And I like to think that he and Stella eventually settled down together, but I like the way that the movie ends just the way it is. Of course, when I'm thinking about that, if my evil brain gets to working, I can think of some horrible things where the jangly man comes to Ramon in the jungles of Vietnam when he's mortally wounded and just stop, evil brain, stop. Just stop.
I see your brain is cursed by evil as mine.
Yeah.
So if they are planning on using one of the Cerebello's books to bring back Chuck and Augie, I have a couple of questions. Do the books even still have the same power if Cerebello's is not possessing them anymore? If the books do have the same power, it would seem that she holds in her hand something akin to Bastion's never-ending wishes, combined with some of Jack Gable's writing powers. So we can infer that she is planning to write them back to life. Let's hope she does not have them come back from a Native American burial ground. Now, I have two questions for you, Neb. Did you catch all three of the references I just made in there? And two, what did you think about all that?
Let me think about that. Let's see here. I think we are talking about a possible never-ending story that could turn you delirious as you venture into a pet cemetery in Amityville, Long Island, where a teen poltergeist is building a housing complex. Complete Hail Mary on that final reference, but how did I do there?
Bam. Evil
Nice.
Trivia pie piece for you, my friend. You are all over those references. You even get a bonus point for the Amityville Horror Hail Mary.
Awesome. Amityville Horror Hail Mary. Say that 3 times fast and it'll probably appear to you in your bathroom mirror. So anyway, I also want to note that Jack Gable is the original Wolf of Wall Street. And if you know, you know. And that's all there is to say about that. So with that said, it's that time for that part of the show that makes young maidens gush from bloody wounds and makes young men dream unpleasant dreams, uttering, "I'll be back," before walking into legend. Do you know what time it is, Mike?
It rubs the lotion on its skin or it gets the hose again? Seriously, though, we have reached my favorite part of the episode, and that is talking about the kills and counting the bodies of the dead, because we are sick, morbid fucks, otherwise known as horror writers.
Damn straight we are. So, without further ado, let's count those corpses. A stab signal, please. Nice. All right. So, the first death mentioned in the films is off screen, but I think it's worth mentioning because it has a huge effect on Ramon's character. Ramon mentions that his older brother was blown up in Vietnam after being drafted, and now he is fleeing the draft. Now, it's not scary at all, But I think the emotional depth, the description of the death brings was worth mentioning, even though it happens off screen. What do you think, Mike?
Oh, off-screen deaths definitely count, especially when the death has a major effect on Ramon as a character. It's pretty hard not to understand what seeing your fucking brother come back in pieces would make somebody want to be a draft dodger. I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to fight in any war, despite having great respect for those that have and do. If they had a draft going right now, my ass would be in Canada. My mom made me promise that back when I was a kid, and I do not want to experience killing another human being. So I was totally on Team Ramon there. So that's corpse number 1. Let's get into corpse number 2.
Absolutely. So now that I got those sappy plot lines out of the way, let's get to the good. So each of the monsters in the film gets one big moment, and the first one is my favorite for a number of reasons. The little shit, Tommy Milner, gets yeeted by Harold the Scarecrow and eventually is turned into a scarecrow himself. Tommy is a racist bully and, by all appearances, an abusive boyfriend as well. This guy is well on his way to becoming a John Strode-like character, and I know you love that, Mike. So, but Harold comes in to save the day, stabbing him with his pitchfork after scaring the living shit out of the little shit. So, therefore, Harold.
That was like little shit squared.
Yeah. Got to give an evil laugh there in appreciation for Harold. So, as he's stabbed, Tommy spits out hay and begins the transformation process that turns him into a scarecrow, taking Harold's place in permanent undeath. I love this kill for the sheer terror in Tommy's face, the dark irony of it, the effects, the stabbing with the pitchfork, and then the implication is Tommy gets his and takes his place as a nesting place for bugs, worms, and crow shit. Job done. What did you think of Tommy Milner's big moment here, though, Mike? Did you appreciate it as much as I did?
I thought it was interesting that Harold kept appearing in different parts of the cornfield. In the midst of the field of corn where everything looks the same, it almost gave the illusion of being like supernaturally stuck in a part of the field, like how the two guys and the girl in the Blair Witch Project walked all day and came back to where they started. Or when you keep walking back into the same building every time you go out the exit. It added a feeling of inescapable danger. I also liked that the instrument that passed the scarecrow curse onto Tommy was a pitchfork. It's very apropos with the whole stuffed with straw thing. Ultimately, a piece of shit got what he deserved, so I was good with it.
Nice. So I have to ask you, though, since I know you love John Strode so much, was Terrible Tommy on his way to being a Strode-like asshole? And I need that answer before you take our next corpse. I have to know. The minute I saw this guy, I was like, I got to ask Mike about this. So what do you think?
Oh, definitely. He starts shit and acts like the people he started shit with are out of line for returning fire. He pushes his date down the stairs. Luckily, she didn't tumble down them and locked her younger brother, and his friends down into the basement. So, misplaced anger? Check. Abusive to both potential lover and younger kids? Check. Overall drunken asshole? Check. Yep, that's all the John Strode boxes there. So, yes, them, he was.
Ding, 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 ding. We have our biggest loser and winner of the John Strode Death Scholarship, Mr. Tommy Milner. Come on down. Oh, you can't. Well, Harold will take your all expenses paid cruise down the River Styx for you then. Back to you, Mike.
All right. Next in line is corpse number 3. I don't know what it is, but I really like it when the rational and logical one that doesn't believe is confronted by undeniable proof. He puts a big, dirty, decaying toe in his mouth and takes it out of his mouth slowly, making sure to suck all of the juice off of it before he examines it. I would never put decaying flesh in my mouth, but I have to assume that would be pretty nasty, especially with dirt under the toenail like it was. I don't know about y'all, but I would have spit that out into the sink or the trash, whichever was closest, the second I tasted that flesh. I imagine a similar revulsion to smelling rotten food is going on there. You know how burning flesh and burning hair is particularly repugnant to a human? I just don't get it. It was likely just done for dramatic effect, but still. Now that Augie finally believes the real terror sets in as the toeless corpse gets closer and closer, the tension really builds in that scene. The final reveal of the toeless corpse as he or she pulls Augie into the void was pretty burly. It scared me not once but twice watching this film for the show.
Nice.
Unfortunately, while we are still acknowledging the death as number 3, there is technically no corpse to count here. So let's move on to number 4 then, Nim.
Well, hey, just because there's no corpse doesn't mean it's not creepy. I mean, no way would I want to be sucked into the void with a toeless corpse. I'll just say that. And as far as like sucking on big toes, yeah, that's just some creepy, kinky shit. And I don't care what Greg says. We're going to kink shame Augie for that one for doing it. So that's it. So corpse number 4 comes courtesy of the Pale Lady. And I'm down with what you said earlier, Mike. This was creepy. I didn't think the Pale Lady was particularly scary to look at, but damn, she was frightening in execution. Mm-hmm. Chuck gets separated from his friends in the asylum and sets off an alarm. Chuck is the proverbial scaredy cat in this film, the mama's boy, who refuses to cut the cord even though he chafes at his mother's attention. And that way, he's much like Eddie from It.
Ooh, nice comparison there. I like that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And let's dine on an evil piece together for our admiration of It. Evil piece, please.
Hell yeah. It
num,
fucking
num,
rules.
num, 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 num.
Yeah.
So, as Chuck flees, wandering scared and alone in the asylum, Stella and Ramon notice that a new story is being written by Sarah in the book. This story manifests the Pale Lady, a nightmarish figure that haunts Chuck in his dreams, stalking him to take him into her embrace. Desperately, he runs from her, only to find her around the corner at every turn. Eventually, the Pale Lady catches Chuck, and he is consumed, pulled, screaming into her stomach as she embraces him for all eternity. This death is cruel, frightening, and gives the movie the first sense of unfairness, which makes it horrifying on just a whole other level for me. Augie and Tommy Billner, in my opinion, both earned their deaths. Tommy much more than Augie, though. But this one tortured a boy whose only real flaw was that he was unable to conquer his fear and come of age, as it were. It was wonderful in its execution and horrifying in its concept. That's my 2 cents, but what did you think, Mike?
I hate to disagree with you, Nim, but Tommy was lower than pond scum. Tommy was the pus that infects the mucus, that cruds up the fungus, that feeds on the pond scum.
So you were at my best friend's wedding as well, I see.
Oh. You weren't supposed to notice that. Did I just commit unholy sacrilege by quoting a rom-com on a horror podcast?
Well, it depends on the rom-com. Ba-dum-bum. All right. These are the jokes, folks. I'm sorry. You're too far into the podcast to back out now, so just hold on. It'll be over soon. Back to you, Mike.
Seriously, though, when you're talking about deserve to die, Tommy is definitely on that list. But Augie's one flaw really was disbelief, and that is not a getting pulled into the void by a toeless corpse offense. I suppose that according to horror movie rules, not believing is akin to saying I'll be right back, I guess. So by the rules, he should die, but I just can't say he deserved it. Could you maybe elaborate on your perspective there?
Okay. I agree with you on all that, Mike, but with this proviso. I think Tommy suffers from the same fatal flaw as Ramon. He just manifests it differently. He's a coward and refuses to face up to his fears. The repulsive part, and I agree he has some serious character flaws, is he turns his cowardice and shame back on the world as a defense mechanism. On second thought, maybe it wasn't appropriate for me to say that he didn't deserve to die, but he's so pathetic in character flaws that I feel pity for him. A momentary moment of empathy and weakness that I shall not repeat again. Screw him. Let him die.
I guess we're even for my wrong prom quote earlier. The final death of the film is number 5, and that is none other than Police Chief Turner. He is killed rather quickly by the jangly man who snaps his neck in one twist of his head. The death itself was okay. I mean, how many times has a person had their neck snapped in a movie? If you want points for a kill like that, I recommend the dude drinking beer in the rain from The Curse of Michael Myers theatrical cut. You actually get to see the spine sticking out as Michael removes his head. Now that's how you snap a fucking neck. The really cool part of this kill was actually when the jangly man was just ahead on the floor. Police Chief Turner says, "Are you shitting me?" And I can't help but think of the scene in John Carpenter's The Thing where the head grows legs like a spider and that guy says, "Are you kidding me?" I figure that has to be a nod. What do you think of that, Nim?
Hell yeah. An evil piece to you, my man, for catching that.
Hell yeah.
Nom on that piece.
Yeah, baby, munching that shit.
Yeah, I have to say that death was over real quick. But once again, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is serving us some poetic justice. For all the shit horror movies get from certain segments of the population, have you noticed that as a general rule, horror movies push some rather strict moralism? If you are a piece of shit and step out of line, your days are probably numbered in a horror movie. I mean, what's up with that, Mike? Or am I just seeing things?
I think it's because it's a universal truth. From Hindu's karma to Christianity's you reap what you sow to Isaac fucking Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. One way or another, what we do will come back on us. This concept is often done in extreme fashion in horror movies, and I love it.
What we do in life echoes in eternity. Evil peace time for that movie quote. Go.
Oh, yeah, baby. I definitely get the piece on that one because that was a quote from Gladiator. But you are awarded a point of inspiration for quoting a movie from my favorite director of all time, Sir Ridley Scott.
I will take that point of inspiration and save it for the next time I need to re-roll saving throw on Countless Corpses podcast. So. Oh, man. All right, folks. So Mike is chowing down on evil pieces, and that's as good a note as any to bring us to the wrap-up portion of our show. I will say again that I was pleasantly surprised by this movie, and it's one that I can come back to at least once a year on Halloween. For a PG-13 movie, it does give you a few great scares, and I think the film does a great job taking disparate stories and turning it into a convincing narrative that is scary, compelling, and makes you cheer and yell at the characters in equal measure. So, good for them. Grading this movie, I think I give it a 2.5 out of 5 for the kills. It would rank higher for me, but they don't have that gore factor, and there aren't a lot of them. So that's why it's going to get marked down. The kills of this movie are more kills of the mind that are frightening in their conception and upon some contemplation of the film and what exactly they're trying to do. That doesn't mean they aren't enjoyable. They're just different from what you might get in Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street. As for the movie itself, I give it a solid 4 out of 5 skulls. It's the kind of movie that I can sit back and enjoy. It gets my creative juices flowing, and it's a nice, relaxing horror movie. And now that I say that, I am one sick man. So, over to you, Mike. What are your closing thoughts on Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark?
I genuinely like this movie more than I thought I was going to, and it gets points for actually being a good PG-13 horror movie. There just aren't many of those. Finding one of those that is actually good is a rarity. That said, I cannot go 2.5 on the kills. I'd feel more comfortable at a 2 out of 5 skulls. And that is for the creepy or scary elements rather than really being great kills. But to be fair, I'm going by slasher standards here. And I'm likely going to be needing an R rating for a higher score. As you mentioned, we need the blood and the guts and to hear the lamentations of their women. Sorry, I went all Conan the Barbarian there for a moment.
Well, now I need a Bjorn death metal yell. Sorry. Just need it.
Ooh.
Yes.
But as for the movie itself, I'm going to have to go 3.75 out of 5 skulls. And the only reason I'm scoring it a bit lower is because I do not feel like I need to own the film. As I have discussed previously, needing to own a film adds to the score. But as per usual, our scores are somewhat close. But that wraps up this episode of Countless Corpses podcast. If you like the show, we invite you to check out our other episodes and hit that sub button if you want to see more. Before we go, though, I would like to leave you with a quote from the bard himself, William Shakespeare, who said, "Hell is empty and all the devils are here."